right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar this week, July 1st, 2016. Looks like we've got a little smaller attendance this week, with probably because of the holiday weekend, but I've still got some people that are looking like they're getting on. So, I'd like to just give a little. The webinar today is on hiring right and firing timely, and the presenter today for today's webinar will be Mike Pattern. He is a representative from BBSI here in town, Barrett Business Systems, and I'll let him introduce himself here in just a minute and tell a little bit about himself. I wanted to remind everybody that these webinars are being recorded, and we have an archive of all of them. If you want access to that archive, you just have to shoot me an email, Brian at ictr.com. And then next week's webinar will be on the ins and outs of Google, and this is going to be I've watched this presentation, the ladies out of Boise, and it's literally a 2-hour class that she put on over there for us, that she's going to try and condense all the heavy meat and potatoes down into our 30 minutes next week. And if your business is on Google, you need to make sure that your presence is the best, and she's going to have some secrets on making sure that your business is recognized on Google. And that will be presented by Kim Labram next week. We are excited about these webinars. We're getting more and more traction each and every week, so we appreciate that. And with that, I'll turn the time over and appreciate Mike Pattern from BBSI, and I'll let him introduce himself and take over the topic for the day.
Terrific. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm really tickled to be here, and I'm really pleased that you were able to take time out of your day to join us. I'm going to do my very best to make sure that it's time well spent, and hopefully you'll have more than 1 or 2 takeaways from our presentation today. As mentioned, my name is Mike Patton. I'm with BBSI here in Idaho Falls. I've worked in a number of facilities. I've worked in 3 different food manufacturing facilities, as well as a metal engineering design and fabrication shop. So I've had a pretty wide range of experience. One of the things that I have learned over the years is that no matter what business you're in the people business. That's absolutely, it's an old maxim, but it's absolutely the truth. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about people. So here's an overview of today's discussion. I know we talked about hiring and we talked about firing, but there's a bunch of stuff that goes in the middle, and that's the water and weed part. So we'll talk about making good decisions when you're hiring, watering and weeding, and moving forward. So I liken the whole hiring process to speed dating. Kind of what happens is you sit down across from somebody, you have a few minutes of conversation, and then you decide to enter into a long-term relationship based on that few minutes of conversation. So if you can think about interviewing your wife or your husband or whatever for a very short amount of time, and then going ahead and making that decision for a long-term commitment, it's pretty frightening. So if that's the way we're going to do it, we want to make sure that we do it as right as we possibly can. So good hiring decisions always start with an accurate job description. A good job description will help you identify what skills it is that you're looking for. It'll narrow the field of candidates as you're going through your stack of resumes. It's pretty easy to spot who's gonna meet the cut and who's not. It'll help you price the position. If you're asking for an MBA and you're willing to pay $8 an hour, chances are you're not going to have very good luck. So you need to adequately price the position. Establish realistic expectations for what kind of candidates you're going to get. It'll also later on help you evaluate the employee's performance level and as to whether or not they're doing the job that you wanted them to do. It will also help you defend against unfair lawsuits. So there's just a whole multitude of reasons why you want to start with a good job description. So now that we've got that in place, it's time to advertise. And so I know a lot of folks are pretty old school, and they say, well, I don't like social media. I don't Facebook. I don't LinkedIn. I don't any of that stuff. Well, the problem is most of your potential candidates do. Most of your potential candidates are out there.
Is there a way to turn up the speaker?
Is that any better there?
What's that?
Can you hear me now?
A little bit. It's about half of what Brian's was.
That's one of the things we checked. I apologize. How's that?
Oh, that sounds better.
Okay, we'll give it a go. So it really doesn't matter if you're involved in social media or not. Your candidates are, so you want to make sure that you're posting out there. You're using all the avenues, all of the resources available to you. You'll notice at the very last on the list is newspapers. It's my own particular prejudice. I have found that they are very expensive and not as effective as they have been in the past years. So how do you go about advertising? Well, one of the things that you need to remember is that you're selling your position, and to sell your position, you want to promote the positive. You want to make it an exciting thing. Why the heck would somebody want to come work for you? And so the only way that you can get that is by promoting the positive. Make it compelling. You know, bad postings, they don't generate very many candidates. Then you also, in your posting, you need to separate the must-haves and separate them from the nice-to-haves. You know, perhaps you have to have somebody that speaks Russian. Typing 140 words a minute maybe would be nice, but it's not necessarily necessary. So keep those two separate, because the more must-haves you have, the smaller your applicant pool. Always stick to the facts, unless it's a bona fide occupational qualification. You can't dictate male or female, for example, tall or short, for example. A good example of that is you need a heavy laborer, somebody that can lift and tote lots of heavy weight all day long. Well, you can't necessarily limit your applicant pool to males only. It's against the law, and you also don't want to limit your pool. So don't ask for anything that you don't have to have. You also don't want to unintentionally exclude potential candidates. For example, if you're looking for somebody to do marketing for you, and you say, well, must have a marketing degree. Well, you've just bypassed a whole host of folks that have business degrees and tons of marketing experience. So you don't want to unintentionally exclude potential candidates. Here's how not to advertise. And if you'll take a few minutes and look through the newspaper, frequently you'll see ads just very, very similar to this. It's neither enticing nor is it exciting. There's nothing in here that makes me want to hurry and contact these folks. So now we've created a job description, we've done a posting, we've got a bunch of resumes in, we went through them and decided, okay, let's set up some interviews. And so what do you do next? Well, the first thing you want to do is prepare for the interview. You do that by refreshing your memory. Read the resume again to make sure that you're familiar with the candidate that you're about ready to see. You want to help the interviewee feel comfortable, make them feel at ease. You want to see them at their very best, and so to get that, they need to feel comfortable. The other thing you need to do is shut up. I can't tell you how many interviews I've sat in where the person doing the interview would tell me all about them, they'll tell me all about the company. They never ask any questions about me. So at the end of the interview, I know a lot about them, but they don't know very much about me. Use a list of questions, but don't be afraid to follow the path where the questions lead. Very often, their response can elicit some curiosity on your part, or at least it should. Let's follow that and see where it goes to. So don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions. Converse, don't interrogate. And I think Covey had it absolutely right. Seek first to understand. When they say something to you, don't assume you know what it means. When they say, well, and you know, actually you don't know, so ask them. Ask a follow-up question to make sure that you understand what it is they're trying to say. One of the best methods that I've come across to interview is the STAR method. And basically, you're asking for a situation, and then what task did they take? What task did they take on? What was the action? What action did they take as a result of that task? And then finally, how did it all turn out? So here's an example. Tell me about a specific time when you had to work with a very tight deadline. A lot of times people will respond with, well, I generally or I usually, and that's, you don't really get to see them in action that way. So a better question is, no, tell me about that time in 2005 when you very specifically had to meet that tight deadline. You know, whatever it was, don't let them talk in generalities. Make sure that you're talking about very specific things. Tell me about the task. What was the assignment? What did you have to do? What were the constraints? What were the requirements? And then how did you react? What did you do? How did you go about taking care of the tasks that you had been assigned? And then lastly, how did it all turn out? Was it a good thing? And if a candidate has an example where it didn't turn out so well, that's not necessarily a bad thing if it was a learning experience. I think all of us have had the opportunity to fail to some degree or another. And if you can use those failings as learning experiences, hey, there's nothing wrong with sharing those experiences either. And then one of the other things that you want to do is you want to give a warts and all interview. And so when you're talking to them about the job, if the job requires that they work at heights, make sure that they know that. If the job requires that they're working in very, very high heat, make sure they know that. If they have an extremely demanding manager, make sure that they know that. You want to establish their expectations. If they walk in expecting one thing and they find something completely altogether different, they're going to start out unhappy right from the very, very get-go. But if they walk in and they see exactly what you've described to them, they say, yep, that's what I kind of expected, and they're more likely to give you good performance. And then after the interview, because there's some follow-up to do, you can contact references, but I'll be honest with you, I've never put a reference down on my resume that isn't going to say amazing and wonderful things about me. So really it's better if you can call some former employers, excuse me. Very often they're hesitant to give you a lot of information, not always, but very often they are. But almost always you'll have a 98% success rate with the question, is this person eligible for rehire? And that can tell you an awful lot. If they say yes, that kind of can set your mind at ease a little bit. If they say no, that doesn't necessarily exclude the candidate, but it should put up a red flag. So you may want to do just a little bit more, have a few more questions, things of that nature with the candidate. Don't be afraid to do a second interview. I frequently use a pro-con list to help me with my decisions. And realize that there isn't a perfect candidate out there. No, if you've got a requirement of 10 things, nobody's going to have all 10. But if they've got 8 out of 10, that's pretty good. If they only have 4 out of 10, you probably want to keep looking. You don't want to settle. And then one of the things that I have seen is the first candidate will come in and they will just be absolutely amazing, just terrific. People say, yeah, but I want to look at a couple more. And so it takes another week or two to look at those couple more, and then finally you go ahead and make your decision. And you reach back out and you contact your first candidate, and guess what? He really was fantastic, or she really was fantastic, and now they're no longer available because somebody snapped them up. So if the first interview was pretty amazing, you might want to move on that very first interview. And so I want to talk just a little bit about Nucor Steel, and I'm going to read this to you so that I get it right. As featured in the book Good to Great, I just think it's an amazing story. You want to talk about hiring for character rather than skills. The truth of the matter is most of the skills out there I can teach you. I can't always teach you to show up to work on time. I can't always teach you how to interact well with customers. And so character is absolutely crucial. As I mentioned, let me read this to you. Nucor became the #1 American steel company, but it started from a lowly position. To build the right kind of culture, they decided to find farmers instead of experienced steel workers, on the premise that you can teach a farmer how to make steel, but you can't teach farmers work ethic to people who don't have it in the first place. They set up their mills outside of typical steel-producing locations, and instead they went for cities full of farmers, Crawfordville, Indiana, Norfolk, Nebraska, and Plymouth, Utah. Places full of real farmers who go to bed early, rise at dawn, and get right to work without fanfare. Gotta milk the cows and gonna plow the North 40 before noon. All of this translates easily into gotta roll some sheet steel and gonna cast 40 ton before lunch. So when you're out there looking for candidates, don't be afraid to look for character. As I said, you can always teach them skills. Okay, we've made the decision, we've extended an offer, and they're getting ready to show up on their very first day. And so we need to onboard them, we need to get them started. So be prepared, spend some time ahead of time. If they're going to be sitting at a desk, make sure you've got that desk set up, make sure you know where they're going, make sure that the phone is set up, make sure there's instructions for the phone so that they can set up their voicemail, all of that kind of stuff. You know what, an org chart's amazing when you're starting with a brand new company because you need to know who the movers and shakers are. You need to know who reports to who. Those are all the kind of things that you can do to make onboarding pretty good. It's imperative that you make them feel welcome. They gotta feel like they made a good decision to come join you. The unemployment rate is pretty darn low, and I think it's somewhere around 3.4% here in Bonneville County. And so when you're looking at an unemployment rate like that, they can take their ball and go elsewhere. They don't necessarily have to play for your team. Make introductions, show them the lay of the land. The quicker they get settled in, the quicker you make that transition into them being your employee, the quicker they can be productive and the more likely they are to add to your bottom line. Check in at the end of the day, check in at the end of the week. Make sure that they're doing okay and that they've got all that they need. Okay, so this is the middle part, this managing the employee, water and weed. So it's true in agriculture and it's absolutely true in employees. Water what you want to grow and weed what you don't want. So if they're exhibiting positive behaviors, you want to make darn good and sure that you're rewarding those positive behaviors. If they're doing the things that you want done, make sure that you acknowledge that. Let them know it. And then if they're doing things that you don't approve of, or if they're outside of the outside of the boundaries, make sure that they know that. You can head them back in. They can't make any changes unless you're talking to them, and they can't do more of the right stuff if you don't encourage it. Really, it all leads to performance. The employee can't give you performance if you can't define it. A lot of times, it's sad, but it's true. A lot of time employers say, well, he's not doing what I need. I say, well, what do you need him to do? They say, well, I'm not really sure. I know it when I see it. Well, that's just not going to work. The employee has to be able to see the path. Coaching for success is absolutely crucial. Performance reviews, everybody thinks of them as an annual thing, but really they happen every day in your interactions with your employees. You need to be visiting with your employees. You need to be talking to them. Make sure that you know what's going on. Hold the conversations with them. If it's the good conversations as well as the difficult conversations. If they're straying over towards the boundary line, try and bring them back. Head them back. Positive behavior deserves positive reinforcement. And if you've had to have a discussion about negative performance, make sure that you document it. It doesn't have to be anything large or elaborate, but it needs to be dated and it needs to kind of hold the overall summary of the discussion that you held. Limit the conversation to job performance. Do not diagnose the issue. Don't tell them, well, I think your alcohol is getting in your way of job performance. You don't know that, and by specifying alcohol, you perhaps have opened up a door to the ADA Act, and you really don't want to go down that path. So don't diagnose the issue. Everything that you talk about needs to refer to their performance. And don't allow the employees to cloud the issue by talking about other people's performance. You know, it's the tried and true method. Well, if you think I'm bad, you ought to go see what Stan's doing. Well, it doesn't matter what Stan is doing. We need to talk about your performance. So the sad truth is no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, some employees just aren't going to make it in your organization. So the only thing that we can do is terminate them. But let's do a real quick reality check before we get to that termination. Have you done your part? Have you done what you're supposed to? Have you been a good coach? Do they know that their performance has been unsatisfactory? Have they had the necessary tools to do the job? You know, if you're an operator, if you're a telephone operator and your phone is out of service, it's pretty hard to do your job. Do they have all of the skills to do their job? Maybe they just flat don't know how. Are there things out of their control? And that sometimes does happen. Could they really do the job if they wanted to, but they're just not? And have you held a conversation based in compassion? So sometimes really terrific performers, suddenly their performance will go south on you. And you need to hold the conversation with them that you've noticed that their performance has been slipping. What's that all about? And sometimes it turns out that they're real people and they have real lives. And you know, an example that I can think of that I've encountered in my own life, it turns out that a family member was very, very, very ill, and it was affecting their performance. We were able to work through those issues, and ultimately we saved a terrific employee, and we helped them get through their issues. So don't ever be afraid to hold those conversations. You can't move forward without action, but there's a whole host of people out there that think, well, it's just easier to live with it than it is to fix it. So here's a real quick overview. If you think about employees' performance levels, much like student levels, you know, a C employee may give you back their salary, maybe they'll cost you customers, maybe they'll cost you more money than they actually bring in. B level, they'll make their salary maybe a little bit more. And an A level employee, the truth of the matter is they'll bring in many times their salary. And more importantly, they'll allow the boss to take a vacation or two. That's not always the case with the C-level employees. And so my question to you is, can you really afford not to fix the issue? You know, a few minutes of pain versus living with this employee for the next 15 years. So I came across this statement when I was doing some dog obedience classes, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. I find it to be true of employees, I find it to be true of children, and I find it to be true of at least my dog Rooster. After 2 years, you get the dog that you deserve. So after 2 years, if your dog is still peeing in your living room floor, it's probably not the dog's fault. It's your fault for not managing the situation. After 2 years, if your employee still isn't doing their job, it's probably not the employee's fault. You haven't managed the situation. So we don't want to go just pell-mell and take action without some consideration. We want to make sure that we're crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's. There are some legal consideration. Has the employee complained of harassment or unfair treatment? Has the employee been dealing with military or medical leave? Is the employee about to vest in a benefits plan or involved in union organization activities? Have they complained about wrongdoing, perhaps safety issues? Did we make any kind of promises, either on paper or verbally? Has the person asked for accommodations? Have other employees been terminated for similar behavior? And is it possible that there's evidence of discrimination based on any of the protected classes? The truth of the matter is there are governmental agencies out there that are looking at all of these things. And if you answer yes to any of these questions, then you may want to reconsider a termination because maybe there's some other affairs in your house that need straightened up. So it's time to complete the act. We've decided to make the decision. We've crossed all of the checkpoints off, and we feel like we're very comfortable. It's the right thing to do for the organization, and in fact, it's the right thing to do for the employee. So how do you go about doing it? First off, never fire without a witness. Keep it short and to the point. Never apologize. You have to remember it was their behavior that caused you to take this action, not yours. So don't start the conversation out with, I'm sorry, Dave, but, because you shouldn't be sorry. It was Dave's behavior. Don't ever argue with the employee. It will lead to a bad outcome. You need to allow the employee to vent for a brief time. They can tell you what a dirty, rotten company it is. They can tell you how lousy a manager you are. And that's okay for a few minutes. They need to go ahead and get that out of their system, because if it isn't your fault, then it means it's got to be their fault. And so it takes a while for that to kind of settle in. Remember, it's a really, really difficult time for the employee, and all they have at that point in time is their dignity. Please help them preserve it. So that's really from a 30,000-foot level, how to go about having a terrific set of employees. Does anybody have any questions?
Michael, this is Brian. I've got one. You talked in there about doing performance reviews. How often do you suggest to do employee performance reviews?
You know, at least on an annual basis. And the important thing, there's two reasons to put it down on paper. The first reason is because it's an official paper trail and you have documentation that you have discussed issues with them. But the other reason is that it actually forces you to hold that conversation. Hopefully you've been holding that conversation all year long. You know, you've had the opportunity to have those discussions. If the employee is ever surprised when you do a performance evaluation, then you haven't done your job as a manager. They should know exactly how you feel because you're holding those discussions. So at least on an annual basis, there can be some reasons to do it more frequently, but I prefer my own personal viewpoint is I prefer a more less formal approach, just those everyday conversations.
Okay, very good. I've got one other. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions, but quite a few things came up on here. On the hiring part, where are people looking for jobs these days? Are they looking, I mean, is the newspaper, is it online, is it Craigslist, is it Indeed, is it LinkedIn? Where are people searching to find jobs as an employer that I'm going to be posting a job available here soon? Where do I need to post that job to get the best response?
You know, a year ago I was looking for welders, and I had a really good outcome using Craigslist, for example. And one of the things that I would do would be to look for specific areas. So I'm thinking, well, the oil and gas industry is kind of in a downturn, so I would advertise in those areas. And so you want to fish where the fish are. So I'm not sure that Craigslist is as effective for professional positions, but certainly LinkedIn is an opportunity. Again, you can certainly use newspapers, and I don't mean to sound like I discredit them altogether, but bang for your buck, I think that social media is truly much more effective. And don't ever discount your own networks, because you've got a friend who has a friend. And so you want to tell everybody that you know as loud and as frequently as you can that you're looking for a new cost accountant, because everybody knows somebody.
Good. In the firing timely aspect, I had a friend call me yesterday that was in the process of letting their assistant go, and they're like, do I just keep them around so they can bide out the time for their 2 weeks? And there was a lot of questioning going on and some self-doubt because there was the employee was already pretty well out the door mentally and physically, and I talked to him last night, and they ended up cutting the strings before because of the significant bad situation that was there, and they felt a lot of pressure relief after having done that, instead of having to wait for the 2 weeks and let them poison the well. What do you suggest when a person knows that they're leaving an organization? What's your best advice there?
I find it interesting because many employers demand loyalty from their employees. They absolutely want to make sure that their employee pledges allegiance to them. And then the employee finds another job somewhere else, and they come in and say, you know what, I need to turn in my 2 weeks notice, and the employer takes umbrage. They take it very personally, and they say, well, that's it, you don't need to turn in your 2 weeks, you're out of here. And so pretty soon that spreads throughout the troops, and everybody knows that if you turn in your 2 weeks, you're going to get fired. And then one day the business owner is sitting around saying, these rotten employees will never give me any notice. They just up and quit. They're just terrible. And so you're going to kind of get the behavior that you reward. On the other hand, if you've got, as you pointed out, an employee that's already a non-performer, not doing what they need to do, the sooner that you cut those ties, the better you are. So to some extent, you want to do it on a case-by-case basis, but just please remember that there's ramifications for every action that you take.
I agree with that. Very good. Is there any other questions from any of our other attendees we have today? turn your microphone on. If you do, there's no other questions. Speak up or forever.
Either I've lulled them to sleep or I've covered it so succinctly that they know it all.
One of those two. So we appreciate your time, Michael. Michael Patton of BBSI, and great presentation. Next week's presentation will be on Google, so tell everybody about it. It's one that I think it's going to be our best webinar of the whole season. Just it's a hot topic of making sure your business is recognized on Google. So with that, we will look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks again, Michael, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.
Hey, thanks for all the effort.